A new report from the Texas Tribune found the head of the Texas Education Agency met with leaders of the late Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA about bringing chapters to every Texas high school and college campus. Jaden Edison is a public education reporter with the Texas Tribune. He's joining us to talk more about this. Jaden, thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
So let's dive right into it. Tell us exactly what you found and how you found this out.
Yeah, a long story. We can sit here all day, but nonetheless, very interesting. I think what happened is that more recently, sometime earlier in the month of November, the Turning Point USA senior director of major gifts, a guy named Josh Tifo, reached out to the education commissioner's administrative assistant, kind of asking questions, specifically framed it like, when would the commissioner like to meet with me, right? Which to me kind of insinuated that perhaps there's a chance that maybe they had met before or there had been some kind of interest in that. And so what happened is that over the course of several weeks, they communicated, they worked, and then ultimately the commissioner met with this individual in person in Austin. And the subject of that conversation was finding out a way to form a partnership potentially to establish Turning Point USA chapters, across as many high schools in Texas as possible, right? It's a national initiative we've seen in places like Oklahoma and Florida, more recently Tennessee as well. And as we know, Turning Point USA, as you mentioned, is the conservative kind of youth advocacy group founded by the late activist, right-wing activist Charlie Kirk. And so, at face value, right, it's an organization that really, promotes itself as, about promoting free speech and things of that nature. But also we know that, on college campuses, is run into a lot of controversy, for the way it's presented itself and the way it's interacted with perhaps, say university professors who it deems, too liberal or progressive. So certainly interesting there. But the meeting was interesting given that the commissioner met with him face to face, at a time as we're seeing a push further to the political right here in Texas.
And not only that, you're seeing a push from state leaders, right, to have more chapters of this organization. Talk to us about Dan Patrick and the big donation he made.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. And so the timing of this kind of works out interesting because, this meeting happens, early in November. And 4 days later, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, puts out a social media post saying he's going to pledge $1 million in his campaign funds to kind of bring this effort to life. And so, again, I'm not saying that there's a connection there, but certainly the timeline happened and played out the way it did. And so that's certainly interesting. And to your, as you just mentioned, right, we are seeing a push by, Republican leaders in this state who feel like public schools, reflect too much of a liberal, bias. But where this is different and where this is interesting is that certainly the education commissioner, is appointed by Governor Greg Abbott, who is a Republican. But there is a reasonable, expectation when you talk to parents and families who feel that education should be apolitical. And so the commissioner, meeting with a national organization with such strong political conservative kind of right-wing ties is kind of, raises eyebrows and questions from people interested in Texas education.
I think another thing that's really interesting about all of this is that there's been so many more restrictions placed on schools, right, in terms of the types of clubs they can have. I think one of the things you mentioned in your article talks about voter registration, but teachers can no longer advocate for students to register to vote. That was included in some of the bills, some of the legislation that passed during the past legislative session and the session before that. Talk to us about how that kind of conflicts if you want to bring such an organization like this into schools.
I think you hit the nail right on the head, right? When you think about it, right? Some of the legislation that passed this past legislative session, right? I'll give you one example, right? Senate Bill 12, which is really a sweeping piece of legislation that seeks to ban all what the state sees as diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in schools. That also places a ban on student clubs that have a LGBTQ plus focus, right? And so, you see laws like that. You see laws that, call on schools to put up posters of the 10 Commandments, which obviously have a specific kind of Judeo-Christian kind of Protestant, focus. And then you also see things like, on one hand, you see, restrictions on the things that can be taught about race and gender and sexual orientation, things of that nature. But you're seeing, more of a focus on aspects of conservative Christianity and things like this, right? Turning Point USA, which we know has a kind of strong, conservative Christian focus. And so certainly those things are running into conflict. That's something that people are talking about.
All right. It's certainly interesting. You guys make sure you check out Jaden's article in the Texas Tribune. Jaden Edison, we thank you so much for being here with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.